Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of my amazing patrons. Once a month, patrons vote on what commander that they'd like to see in an upcoming deck tech. The commander that gets the most votes wins. And the commander that got the most votes this month was Chun-Li Countless Kicks. Chun-Li is a 3/3 human soldier that costs 1 white and a blue. She has multi-kicker Azorius, which means you can pay an additional Azorius any number of times as you cast this spell. When Chun-Li enters the battlefield, exile up to X target instant cards from your graveyard where X is the number of times Chun-Li was kicked, put a kick counter on each of them. And she has, whenever Chun-Li attacks, copy each exiled card you own with a kick counter on it, you may cast the copies. So Chun-Li is all about getting an insane amount of value out of instants that you can recast again and again and again. By getting more and more instants into your graveyard and the more and more times that you kick Chun-Li, the more of those spells you are able to get exiled with kick counters on them. And then whenever you attack with Chun-Li, you get access to every single one of those cards. Now, though you do get to copy the exiled cards, you do still have to cast those copies. Meaning that you have to actually pay to cast them, you are not getting to cast them for free. That being said, of course, there's still a ton of powerful things that you can do with this commander, and yeah, getting access to instants again and again and again, things can get out of hand quite quickly. So our goal is pretty simple: get a ton of instants into our graveyard for Chun-Li, utilize that multi-kicker to get a lot of those cards with kick counters on them, and then start attacking and casting spell after spell after spell. And of course, we're going to have ways to make those spells easier to cast and ways to get even more value out of them. Now, really quick before we jump into the cards in this deck, every single card outside of the commander is less than $1. And of course, in the description below, you can find the link to the cards. And yeah, now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there are plenty of fantastic low-to-the-ground instants with cards like Opt, Thought Scour, and Mental Note, which can make a big impact throughout the game. Each of these just costs 1 mana, and Opt says, scry 1, draw a card. Now, while scrying isn't card advantage, it is card selection, and yeah, it can help us avoid some dead draws, especially when we keep casting this again and again and again with our commander. And then Thought Scour and Mental Note are basically the same card in this deck. Thought Scour says target player mills 2 cards, draw a card, and Mental Note says you mill 2 cards, draw a card. The vast majority of the time, we're going to want to mill ourselves with something like Thought Scour because, yeah, getting more and more instants into our graveyard is always going to be a good thing for our commander. And of course, these simple cantrips can be incredibly easy for us to just cast over and over again thanks to our commander, and they just cost 1 mana and can provide us a lot of value throughout the game. Next up, we've got some more fantastic card advantage spells with things like Thirst for Discovery and You Find the Villain's Lair. Thirst for Discovery says draw 3 cards and discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land card. Now, there are definitely going to be times where we have a basic land in our hand, but you know what? We might rather just put a couple of instants into our graveyard instead. So this card not only can help us dig, but it can help us fill our graveyard. And again, yeah, I'm not just going to keep repeating this on every single card, but again, when we can cast these over and over again with our commander, they can provide an incredible amount of value throughout the game. And then next up, we've got You Find the Villain's Lair, which is an instant that says choose 1, counter target spell, or draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So holding this back as a counterspell can be great, and if we don't need a counterspell, well, again, this is a great looting effect. Moving on, we've got some bigger card advantage spells with things like Factor Fiction, Reign of Revelation, and Vanish into Memory. Factor Fiction says reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile in your hand and the other into your graveyard. This can be a very tough decision for your opponent when making those piles because, again, well, we want cards in our hand and we also want cards in our graveyard, so we're going to be winning essentially either way. Next up, Reign of Revelation is going to have us draw 3 cards and discard 1, so yeah, again, just solid card advantage. Speaking of which, Vanish into Memory can be a massive play in a couple of ways. It says, exile target creature, you draw cards equal to that creature's power. At the beginning of your next upkeep, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to that creature's toughness. So, first up, yeah, this can actually help us out in combat when we swing with our commander by saying, okay, you've got a creature that's going to be blocking my commander, let's just take that creature away temporarily and I'll draw some cards equal to its power. Now, obviously, this can be even more impactful if that creature has, a greater power than toughness, but still we don't mind discarding cards because, again, we can fill our graveyard with instants, which can be great for our commander. And actually, we'll get to this here in a bit, but there are some fantastic ways to pump our commander and ways to pump our entire team as well. So, yeah, we might even end up exiling our commander to draw a ton of cards, and then when our commander comes back into play, the toughness might be back down to 3, but again, we'll get back to that here in a bit. Regardless, one way to get constant value out of our instance is with Wind Rider Wizard. It's a 2/2 human wizard with flying that says whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This is an incredible, repeatable looting effect that can give us additional value on every single instant we cast. And, also any sorceries or wizard spells, but yeah, mostly instants again with a commander that cares about casting instant after instant after instant. But out of this entire deck, there is one card, in my opinion, that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck. And the Golden Pig, the number one card out of our 99, is Vega the Watcher. Vega the Watcher is a 2/2 bird spirit with flying that costs 1 white blue, and it says, whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. Again, our commander excels at casting spells outside of our hand. Again, we're going to be exiling those cards with kick counters on them, and then we can copy those cards and cast them, and yeah, we are not casting those in our hand. So now for each and every single one of those kick counter spells that we're casting, well, we are drawing an additional card on top of whatever else those instants are doing. So even just think about those 1 mana cantrips that now, instead of just drawing us 1 card, which is already great, are going to draw us 2 cards for just 1 mana. The amount of value that this can provide us throughout the game is absolutely incredible, and that's why Vega the Watcher is the Golden Pig. Moving on though, next up let's talk about some flexible cards that can help us out in various scenarios with Light the Way, Unsummon, and Fading Hope. Light the Way says, choose 1, put a +1 counter on target creature or vehicle, untap it, or return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. So if we'd like to give a counter to our commander, great! More likely we're going to be using the other mode though, where we can bounce a permanent we control back to our hand, so if we need to protect one of our permanents, we can do so very cheaply. Or, if we've just built up more resources and we've got more instants in our graveyard, this can be a fantastic way to just cheaply bounce our commander back to our hand so that we can recast her and multi-kick even further for more instants. So of course we've got other cards that can work in a similar way, like Unsummon, which is just a very simple spell but very effective. It says return target creature to its owner's hand. For a single blue mana, this can be a great way to either protect ourselves from one of our opponent's creatures, or, just actually bounce our commander again so that we can either protect her, or we can again take advantage of that multi-kicker even further. And speaking of which, recently we've got an even better version of Unsummon with Fading Hope. It says return target creature to its owner's hand. If its mana value was 3 or less, scry 1. So this is just a strict upgrade. Again, it does the exact same thing, and again, if we're bouncing an opponent's creatures that small, or our own, again, our commander has 3 mana value, so we get to scry 1. And speaking of additional value, we're also going to be running cards like Force Away, Recalibrate, and Unexplained Disappearance. Force Away says return target creature to its owner's hand, and it's got Ferocious. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Now we'll talk about some ways that we can pump our commander and again our team here in a bit, but yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for us to actually meet that Ferocious requirement. And then Recalibrate says return target creature to its owner's hand. If you've discarded a card this turn, draw a card. Of course, like I mentioned before, we've got plenty of ways to discard cards, so yeah, generally we can take advantage of that and draw an additional card with this. And speaking of additional value, there's Unexplained Disappearance, which says return target creature to its owner's hand, Surveil 1. Now for this deck's purposes, Surveil is just basically an improved Scry. Instead of putting that card in the bottom of our library, we can put it into our graveyard, which again can just be another great way to fill our graveyard with more instants. But next up we've got, well, one of my favorite arts in recent years with Runaway Together. It says choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players, return those creatures to their owner's hands. So for just 2 mana, we can either bounce, one of our opponent's creatures and another one of our opponent's creatures, or we can bounce one of our opponent's creatures and, one of ours, like say our commander. So again, this can be a great temporary removal spell, or again, a temporary removal spell that can also work as protection, or one that can help us not reset really, but utilize that multi-kicker again and again. Next up, of course, we've got some more instant speed removal spells with ones now that can deal with some artifacts and enchantments with Disenchant, Forsake the Worldly, and Crush Contraband. Disenchant says destroy target artifact or enchantment. Forsake the Worldly says exile target artifact or enchantment. And Crush Contraband says choose one or both exile target artifact or exile target enchantment. And I probably should mention that Forsake the Worldly also has cycling too, which again, just getting this into our graveyard can be impactful by allowing us to get access to it with our commander, so we can cast this again and again and again. But yeah, overall, getting one of these exiled with our commander can just be a great way to keep the board clean of things that we don't want on the board. Speaking of which, now let's talk about some mass removal spells that we can utilize with this commander with Engulf the Shore, Aether Gale, and Time Wipe. Engulf the Shore says return to their owner's hands all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. Keep in mind, this is an instant, so we can keep doing this with our commander if we get it exiled with a kick counter on it. So again, with enough islands in play, this can be a fantastic repeatable board wipe for us. Next up, there's Aether Gale, which is a sorcery that says return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. For just 5 mana, this can be a fantastic deal, and again, if we actually want to bounce our commander back to our hand, we can utilize this as one of those choices. And speaking of bouncing our commander back to our hand, there's Time Wipe, which says return a creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures. So yeah, we save our commander, and we also get it back so we can multi-kick further, and then we just destroy all their creatures. Speaking of which, let's talk about cards like Single Combat, Slash the Ranks, and Akroma's Vengeance. Single Combat says, each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creature or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. So this one can take everyone's options down to just one creature, and yeah, for us, that's going to be completely fine the vast majority of the time, and yeah, now we just have our commander, which can provide us a ton of value in play, and yeah, players can't get creatures out for a period of time. Next up, there's Slash the Ranks, which says destroy all creatures and planeswalkers except for commanders. So again, this can just take everyone down to one creature, or if our opponents might not even have their commanders out, 0 creatures. And then of course, if we need to get rid of, well, basically everything, there's Akroma's Vengeance, which says destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, or we can cycle it away for 3. So if we really need to hit the panic button, great. If not, cycle it away for some value. Now, of course, since we've talked about cards that can remove things, let's talk about ways to protect our commander even further outside of those bounce spells with things like Sheltering Light, Face Shield, and God's Willing. Sheltering Light says target creature gains indestructible until end of turn, scry 1. This can be a fantastic, repeatable way to protect our commander, especially in combat, and yeah, again, with that scry 1, well, some extra just card selection is never a bad thing. And then Face Shield can be a great card at protecting, well, a lot of things. It says target permanent you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And if we've got 5 or less life, instead, you and each permanent you control gain protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Now, hopefully we're not down to 5 life, because things aren't probably going very well if that's the case, but if we are, yeah, that's a great effect. Regardless, the vast majority of the time, this is a fantastic way to protect our commander from targeted removal, or, just a way to get it through in combat. And then God's Willing is another way to protect our commander. It says target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, and scry 1. So again, like Sheltering Light, a great protection spell with some card selection built in as well. Moving on, we've got Shelter, which is just straight up card advantage on one of these protection spells. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, draw a card. So yeah, by getting a kick counter on this can be a fantastic way to protect our commander and draw cards throughout the game. But perhaps an even simpler way to do this, though, is with a card like Leap that says target creature gains flying until end of turn, draw a card. Now, flying is a form of evasion that can get through generally on most opponents, and yeah, we can just protect our commander in combat with something like this while also drawing cards for cheap. But perhaps an even better way to protect our commander, though, is with something like Winged Boots. It's an equipment that costs 1 to equip, and it says equipped creature has flying and ward 4, which basically means that whenever the equipped creature becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, it gets countered unless that player pays 4. So this can not only help get our commander through, but also protect our commander from target removal as well. But one really fun way to help our commander get through and to protect her in combat is with Nibliss of Frost. It's a 3/3 spirit with flying that has prowess, so again, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, it's going to get ++1 until end of turn. So first up, this creature can get massive in combat really quickly with the number of spells we're going to be casting, and on top of that, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we tap target creature an opponent controls, that creature does it untap during its controller's next untap step. So this can be a fantastic way to tap down a ton of creatures, again, with the number of instants that we're going to be casting, and then ensure that we can get our commander through in combat, and also just, leave a player wide open for other players to swing at. Or, again, also just protect ourselves from getting swung at by those creatures. So yeah, this can do a lot of the work throughout the game for us, and again, it can hit pretty hard once we get things going. But yeah, of course, another way to protect us and our things is with counter spells with things like Negate, Saw It Coming, and Neutralize. Negate's going to counter target non-creature spell, Saw It Coming can counter any spell, and we can forward talent for just 1 in a blue, and Neutralize can counter any spell, or we can cycle it for 2. So yeah, of course, these spells can help us out in a lot of situations. And speaking of helping us out, some cards that can be absolutely incredible for us are cards like Jace's Sanctum, Arcane Melee, and Sage of the Beyond. Jace's Sanctum is an enchantment that says, instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. So first up, this is cost reduction for our instants and sorceries, and again, when we're casting a ton of instants from our commander, this can save us an absurd amount of mana throughout the game. And of course, on top of that, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we scry 1, so that's a ton of additional card selection. Next up, Arcane Melee does say instant sorcery spells cost 2 less to cast, so keep in mind this does help your opponents as well. That being said, it is going to be helping us a lot more with the amount of instants we're going to be casting thanks to our commander. The amount of cost reduction throughout the game with this in play can be absolutely incredible, and it can help us cast, instead of just 1 or 2 instants in a turn, it can help us cast 4 or 5 in a turn sometimes. Speaking of which, Sage of the Beyond is a 5/5 spirit giant with flying that says spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. Again, since we're casting those kick counter spells, well, not from our hand, we get that cost reduction, and again, like Arcane Melee, this can save us a ton of mana throughout the game, but it's just for us. So once we get this in play, it can make a huge impact. And speaking of a big impact, how about Swarm Intelligence, which says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell, you may choose two targets for the copy. Doubling up on every single one of our instants and sorceries is incredible. Especially again when we've got quite a few saved up with our commander, and maybe we've got some other effects that we get value out of, and yeah, things can get out of hand pretty quickly when we've got this in play. Now, when it comes to ramping with this deck, two cards that I do want to highlight are Curious Homunculus and Heraldic Banner. Curious Homunculus has tap, add colors to your mana pool, spend this mana only cast an instant or sorcery spell, and yeah, we've got plenty of those spells to utilize that mana for. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, transform Curious Homunculus. And this side can make a massive impact because we've got Voracious Reader, a 3/4 with prowess that says instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So again, this is another fantastic way to reduce the cost of our spells, which again can make a massive impact when we get things going, and yeah, this can hit pretty hard as well with that prowess. And speaking of hitting hard, this Heraldic Banner, which says when it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+0, and we can tap to add 1 mana of the chosen color. Now we'll get to it here in a bit, but yeah, we've got some fantastic token generators in this deck, so we can help them hit even harder. And our commander and other creatures can hit harder as well with this. Next up, really quick, let's go through the other mana rocks that we're going to be utilizing in this deck with cards like Marble Diamond, Sky Diamond, Prismatic Lens, Everflowing Chalice, Firemine Vessel, Mind Stone, Commander Sphere, Ebony Fly, Azorius Signet, and Liquid Metal Torque. Obviously, the more efficiently that we can ramp, the more those instants that we can cast, and also, the more times we can get our commander back into our hand to get that multi-kicker even further. But one spell that is absolutely incredible once we're set up and once we get this with a kick counter on it with our commander is Dramatic Reversal. It's an instant that says untap all non-land permanents you control. So though this does cost 2 mana to cast, again if we're set up properly and got a good amount of mana rocks in play, we can actually net mana when we cast this, and again that can help us utilize even more instants with our commander's triggers. So yeah, this can lead to some really big plays. Speaking of which, let's talk about some ways to finish off our opponents with cards like Show of Confidence, Leonin Lightscribe, and Soul Blade to Jin. Show of Confidence is an instant that says, when you cast this spell, copy it for each other instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. Put a +1 counter on target creature, it gains Vigilance until end of turn. So this card kind of has Storm, but just for instance in sorceries that we cast, and yeah, with this we can get an absurd amount of counters on our commander. Again, if we have a kick counter on this, we can keep doing that again and again and again each turn. And speaking of pumping our commander, well, and our other creatures as well, Leona Lightscribe says, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So this can make our creatures absolutely massive. Speaking of which, Soulblade to Jin is a 4/3 flyer that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So this one also counts, artifacts, enchantments, etc, etc, etc. And yeah, once we're set up properly and once we have a lot of creatures in play, this can be very, very deadly. And speaking of a lot of creatures in play, well, Murmuring Mystic and Tolerant Sky Summoner are incredible in this deck. Murmuring Mystic says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 Bluebird illusion creature token with flying. Intolerant Sky Summoner says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. With either of these in play, we can make massive armies incredibly quickly, and yeah, it definitely won't be long before we overwhelm our opponents. Speaking of which, we've got Octavia, Living Thesis as well, an 8/8 Elemental Octopus that's going to cost 8 less to cast if we've got 8 or more instant and or sorcery cards in our graveyard. It has Ward 8 in Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, target creature has base power toughness 8/8 until end of turn. Even just in combination with our commander, this can be fantastic at just, making our commander into an 8/8 until end of turn and making her a lot harder to take out in combat. And also, if she is getting through in combat, hit for a lot more damage, which can obviously turn her into, a 3-shot KO or maybe even a 2-shot KO with some other pump effects. And of course, if we've got other creatures or, especially token creatures in play that might be evasive like those birds or like those drakes, have fun opponents trying to, survive our giant army of flyers. And finally, let's talk about cards like Scroll the Masters, Sphinx Bone Wand, and Psychosis Crawler. Scroll the Masters says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a lore counter on Scroll the Masters. And by paying 3, you can tap and target creature control gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each lore counter on Scroll the Masters. With the amount of instants we're going to be casting with this deck, we can get a ton of counters on this and turn our commander easily into, well, at the very least, a 2-shot KO, and sometimes even a 1-shot KO in the right circumstances. But of course, we can also take out our opponents with something like Sphinx Bone Wand. It says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may put a charge counter on Sphinx Bone Wand. If you do, Sphinx Bone Wand deals damage equal to the number of charge counters on its target creature or player. Yeah, this can become very deadly very quickly, the number of instants we're going to be casting with this commander. And of course, with the number of cards that we're going to be drawing with this deck, we can also take our opponents out with Psychosis Crawler. It says, whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. So yeah, this can get out of hand very quickly and take our opponents down very quickly. But now that we've talked about every single non-lane card in this deck, let's talk about the price. As I mentioned at the start of this episode, every single card in this deck outside of the commander is less than $1. So yeah, even though this is a $25 commander, that's quite the price tag, the rest of the deck is incredibly budget friendly. I mean, if you take a look at the price at $51.02, the rest of the deck, the 99, is what, like $26? And of course, keep in mind that this estimated cost also includes the cost of basic lands, which are counted at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those, there's some extra savings there. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, because remember, those cards need a home too. Though do keep in mind this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.